I have been working at Burger King for the past 3 years. I have 2 teenage daughters to look after and a mortgage to pay. But due to lack of high-paying jobs, I am stuck working at this fast food restaurant chain for so many years, despite having a degree. Most of the time, this is not such a bad place to work, but there is a man who has made all our lives hell. Now, you must think this man is our manager. But surprisingly, our manager is a lady who is super nice and understanding. However, there is a regular customer who loves to harass us, especially the female staff members. His name is Mr. Beck, and he is the fattest man I have ever seen. Not that I'm fat-phobic or anything, but this dude is a creep. I'll describe this guy so you can paint a picture. So, this dude is very fat. He always wears a 3-piece suit with a tie and all. However, he cannot walk on his own, as his legs cannot take his body's weight. So, he uses an automated wheelchair that he controls with a control near his hands. He is bald and as pale as snow, and wears expensive shoes and watches. Everyone knows he is loaded, but instead of eating some good food, he prefers eating 2 burgers, large fries, and a large chocolate milkshake from Burger King. But that's not even the worst part. Because he is our regular customer, our manager expects us to give him special treatment. And in the beginning, we weren't against it. However, the more familiar he got with us, the worse he behaved. For example, we often reserve a table for him, or at least make sure the one nearest the exit is available for him. We also bring him his food. Whenever a waitress brings him his order, he tried to grope her or touch her inappropriately. He had pulled this stunt so many times that now only the male members of the staff served him. He also passed lewd comments at some of the younger girls. However, he never did it around our manager. So even if we complained about him, our manager used to ask us to adjust a bit. However, this one time, he crossed the line. As all the male waiters were busy, a new girl who had started working there had to bring him his food. Now, I myself have 2 daughters, and this girl was like a little sister to me. "Hey, you look new here, gorgeous," Mr. Beck said to Mila, the new girl. Not knowing anything about this creep, the poor girl replied, "Yeah, are you a regular here?" "Yeah, I am," Mr. Beck said with a mouthful of burgers and fries. "Nice to meet you. Now I'll leave you to it." Mila pointed to his food, smiled, and started to walk away. But just then, the man wrapped his fat, chunky hand around Mila's waist and pulled her into his lap. Before the poor girl could make out what was happening, Mr. Beck goes, "If you sit on my lap and feed me this food, I'll give you $100. Then he started laughing like a maniac. Mila sat there frozen for a second, looking at us all behind the counter. Then she started struggling against his hold while the huge man laughed. All I could see was red. I instantly went over the counter and freed Mila from his grasp. The young waitress hugged me and started crying. "You need to leave, sir, or else we will be forced to call the cops." "Oh, you think you can get me arrested, miss? What are you, a mere waitress? You think you can get a man like me behind bars?" I knew it was wrong to comment on someone's size, but this time I couldn't hold myself back. I had to give him a fighting comeback. "Well, looking at you, I don't think you'd fit in a single jail cell. But I'm sure the cops could starve you enough to put you in one." This got the whole restaurant laughing. Everyone had seen what this man had done, and none of them were about to pity him. But I could see the rage in the man's eyes. He flipped his food tray, and in seconds, there were fries, pieces of bread, and chicken along with some spilled milkshake all over the floor and his table. You think you can humiliate me, you bitch?" Now Mr. Beck was yelling at me. In one instant, he tried to get up from his wheelchair, but the fat man couldn't take a single step and fell face first into the mess he himself had created mere minutes ago. This got another round of laughter from everyone. Even Mila was giggling. But before anything more could happen, there were cops in the Burger King, and after hearing about the incident, the cops helped the man into the chair and arrested him. More of the staff members stepped forward and complained about his harassment, and he was forever banned from Burger King. Now all the staff members were very relieved. Even our manager supported us after the shit that went down. After that day, we never saw the fat Mr. Beck in the Burger King again. It was like a hex was lifted from our restaurant. However, a few weeks later, someone anonymous started ordering the same order Mr. Beck used to order. This order was to be left at the door of a big mansion. None of the delivery boys saw who picked up the order, but every day in the evening around 5, the order used to be placed. Everyone was sure it was Mr. Beck, as he was, according to Daphne, one of our waitresses, addicted to junk food. But we didn't care much, as no one had to deal with the fat man anymore. However, one day, when the delivery boy delivered the order, which we thought to be Mr. Beck's, he returned and told us that the food he delivered yesterday was still by the door, which meant Mr. Beck had not eaten his order. Or he must have forgotten it. Some of the staff members even joked that the fat lad must have croaked with all the eating he does. We all laughed it off. But the next day, the delivery boy said that the food from the last 2 days was still by the door. This got us a bit concerned. However, if he was indeed dead, then who was making the phone call to order the food every day? We all hated the man a lot, so we did not think much of it that evening as well. But when the delivery boy reported the same thing the next day, our manager decided to call the cops and report the incident. Initially, the cops did not think it was serious either, because we were receiving the payment for each order on our online payment portal. But when this continued for 5 consecutive days, we requested the cops to take a look. Just to be sure everything was okay, I and my manager decided to go to the mansion while the cops checked it out. One of the cops decided to check through the windows when the owner of the mansion, whom we thought was Mr. Beck, did not answer the door. As soon as he peeked inside through the glass, he yelled for backup. Soon, there was a bunch of cops and paramedics breaking into the mansion, all while I and our manager were standing there clueless.
"Oh yeah, this is his mansion. His full name is Mr. Lambert Beckham. And didn't anyone tell you what's going on?"
"No, officer."
"Well, looks like this dude died of a stroke weeks ago. Plus, he kinda choked on a fry. Could not get to his milkshake, and due to the fear of choking, died of a stroke, and finally dies. But that's not even the worst part. There are like a dozen cats of multiple breeds in there, and he wasn't able to feed them for a week. These felines ate half the dead man. The medics will take whatever is left of his body. Looks like the cats didn't starve themselves and didn't mind eating their owner."
Saying that, the officer left, and I and our manager just waited there not knowing what to do. A few minutes later, there was a strong rotten stench in the air, and then we spotted the medics carry some remains of what looked like a half-eaten Mr. Beck on a stretcher. I kid you not, that was the worst thing I had ever seen in my 35 years of life. Looked like the man got what he deserved after all. How many of you believe in demonic possession? I would say many of you enjoy watching those horror movies, but in real life, hardly anyone believes in things like demonic spirits or ghosts until they experience it firsthand. Being a horror freak, I did not miss a single horror movie. You name it, I must have seen it at some point. But like traumatic endings of some horror movies, my life too did not go as I planned, and I ended up working in the Burger King. My job was not even flipping the patties or taking the orders. Nope. I worked as a cleaner. I made sure the Burger King outlet was clean first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening. I mostly worked throughout the day picking up trash and trays left by people on the tables. I wiped the floors whenever necessary and washed the dishes whenever necessary. Every day, hundreds of people visit Burger King. But we have a nurse that works in a hospital opposite to us. She comes here for lunch every afternoon. And with her is her little daughter, Maria. Both of them come here almost every day. The majority of the staff members know these two and their orders by heart. Little Maria won't be more than 5. She is a special child, as she has mild autism and needs some medical care. Good for the little girl, Her mother is a nurse. So every morning, Mary brings her daughter to the hospital with her for therapy, and every afternoon, they come here to grab a bite. Then she drives little Maria to her grandparents and returns to work. Never before this had I dealt with an autistic child. But Maria is pretty sweet and is friends with most of the staff. So she is not scared of us. But to comfort herself, she carries a little rag doll with her everywhere. They say it's to make her feel comfortable. The rag doll makes her feel grounded and safe in some ways, says her mom. Hell, what do I know? If the doll makes the kid happy, so be it. But now Mary is going to be 6 and most probably go to school. So her doctor and therapist thought that it's time she lets go of the toy. So for the last few weeks, they have been working on separating the doll from the child. So far, no success. She had the doll since she was born. It was gifted to her by her late grandmother, and by the condition of the doll, you could say that it has seen better days. Although the doctors are patient with the kid, Mary is not. She thought it would be best if she took the doll away from her daughter once and for all. Sure, she would cry and throw a hissy fit, but Mary was ready to handle it. Mary thought that Maria would get bullied in school if she carried a doll everywhere with her. Nonetheless, a very beaten-up old doll. So the day Mary planned to do this, she brought Maria to our Burger King and ordered some extra food, especially the items Maria liked. Mary had planned to leave the doll behind in the Burger King and pretend that they had lost the doll, so it would hurt Maria less. She had spoken to a few of the staff members about her plan, and we were all going to help Mary distract Maria. I was entrusted with the job of slowly sneaking off with the doll while Maria was busy eating. I had to make sure Maria does not notice me, or, worse, catch me in the act. The day comes when we have to execute the plan. Little Maria enters the Burger King with her mother, and she looked tired from her daily therapy. One of her hands was holding her mother's, and the other clutching the damn doll. They sit at their regular table, and the waitress brings their food, the extra cheese fries, and milkshake on its way. Maria is happy to see that her mom is treating her with all her favorite food items. She momentarily forgets her doll, and that's when I go to their table, pretending to take their empty trays, and I pick up the doll too. Maria was so focused on her food that she did not notice her precious toy missing. But before I could discreetly return the doll to Mary, she got a phone call from the hospital, and she left in a rush, almost dragging little Maria behind her. The poor girl just grabbed her milkshakes and walked away with her mother. No thoughts about the doll. I guess that I was left taking care of the doll for the night. The next day when Maria and Mary would come, I had planned to return the doll to the girl's mother. In the meantime, I decided to keep the doll in the supply closet with all my cleaning stuff. The doll was so dirty that it fit right in there. I continued my shift and paid little attention to the doll. At around 10:30, when all the staff left and I was left with the responsibility to clean the restaurant and lock it up, I walked to the supply closet and opened it to grab my cleaning supplies. But surprisingly, the doll wasn't there. I searched through the closet and found it had fallen at the bottom. Instead of locking up the doll again, I decided to place it on a table and start working. I often clean the kitchen area first as it gets dirtier. Once I finish cleaning one area, I switch off the light and move to the next. I had placed the doll on a table close to the kitchen area, and once I was done cleaning it, I switched off the light, plunging the table into darkness. I continued cleaning, whistling to myself. That's when I see a moment through the corner of my eye. I instantly turn towards the table with the doll and freeze mid-cleaning. The doll was no longer laying flat on the table, but was standing and bent in a weird position. However, what scared me the most were the glowing red, orangish eyes that seemed to pierce through my soul. Next thing I know, the doll's head twists backward, and it's all like it's a horror movie. Instead of being a brave person, I just dropped my supplies and ran home. I did not even bother to lock the Burger King. The next morning when I reached the restaurant, the manager is already at my throat for being so careless and leaving the restaurant open. I explained to him what had happened, and he threw the rag doll, which was still on the table, at my face and fired me on the spot. But I knew that something was very wrong with the doll, and now I'm sitting on the sidewalk waiting for Mary with the doll in my hand and without a job. Now that I look at it, its button eyes and old frilly clothes are the same as they were before. No sign of any demonic possession. So is the doll really possessed, Or is there a problem with my head? Hi guys, my name is Alex, and believe it or not, I was one of the famous Burger King employees who worked in one of the most infamous Burger King branches. The branch that, although no one ever knew it, mistreated its employees the most. It all started when our old manager, who we'll call Jerry, was fired. We had a great time with Jerry. We were so relaxed, and he was so undemanding, we could hardly consider it a job. Yes, customers sometimes complained that we were late in shipping orders, but most of them left happy because they knew we made the food with a lot of love and effort. The bosses were not happy about this because they fired Jerry. At first, we all wondered if one of us would be the next manager. But since they felt that because of Jerry, we were all pretty lazy, they decided to look for someone from the outside. That's when Gene showed up. And that was the beginning of the end of our relaxing days and the beginning of a nightmare that seemed like it would never end. You see, Gene was obsessed with time. The man was always seen with at least 3 watches, always looking at them. Burger King executives loved this quality about him. Because whatever franchise he touched, that franchise radically improved his numbers. They were so obsessed with his accomplishments, no one stopped to think about how he did them. In the beginning, Gene was constantly rushing us. He didn't want us to rest for a second. The moment a customer arrived, we all had to soldier on and not let him wait 5 minutes. He couldn't stand us preparing the food on the spot. All the food had to be previously prepared and assembled according to the client to deliver it much faster. It was hell. Every time one of us would relax, Gene would appear from behind and yell wildly at him to get to work. It was as if he were everywhere at once, as if he had eyes on us all the time. In the first few weeks, he pushed us to the limit. Most of us thought for sure he was going to calm down, that he was probably trying to make a good impression, and that he didn't want to give up in these first few days that he was still new. But needless to say, we were wrong. As time went by, Gene became more and more demanding. He got to the point of standing next to us and timing how long we could make a burger. Many of us complained about him at the end of working hours, but no one ever dared to confront him. Not because he was our boss, but because he was terrifying. The man had a dark presence and he looked at us with such hatred, with such disdain, that we felt that if we said anything to him, he would probably rip our heads off. As time went on, Gene's rules became more and more illogical. Once a week, he would force us to flip burgers next to him. If we took more than 20 seconds, we were financially penalized and part of our salary was taken away. Naturally, some of us started to quit. And this is where the really scary part began. Every time someone quit, Gene would get frantic. That day, you couldn't even look at him or he would scream at you with all his fury. The next day, Gene would go to work, and the day after, he would come in a very strange mood, as if something had happened the day he was absent. We tried to communicate with the guys who quit, but we could not. It was as if the people and their families disappeared off the face of the earth. We couldn't confirm it and we had no proof, but we knew Gene had something to do with it. Meanwhile, back at the shop, everything started to get worse. The time to make a hamburger was getting shorter and shorter. The only day we saw Gene happy was when a coworker managed to do it in 8 seconds. But that only made him even angrier at those of us who didn't make it. In the beginning, people were happy because the food was coming fast, but then the complaints started. We were making the food so fast that we forgot to put in ingredients or did it wrong. Every time this happened, Gene would wait until after work hours to yell at us and hit us. We were all too afraid to say anything to him or to quit. We were sure that something terrible would happen to us if we fought back. And not doing so, not standing up for ourselves, would make it all end in the worst of ways. I remember on the worst day of all, Gene met me outside work. He told us that this would be his last diamond, so he wanted to make sure the staff was prepared. We all smiled and thought that if we would never see him again after this, we would put up with anything. None of us imagined what Gene had prepared for us. Out of nowhere, the maniac pulled out a revolver and pointed it at all of us, who fell back in fear, raising our hands in the air.
You see, guys, I can't allow any efficient personnel to remain on my last day, so that's the way it's going to be. My shift ends at 9 p.m. You have 15 minutes to flip burgers without stopping. Whoever takes longer than 12 seconds will be fired.
Quickly, he pointed the gun at us and made us pass one by one to make hamburgers. Meanwhile, he pointed the guns at our heads, insulted us, and even slapped us in the face. In the beginning, we all managed to do it in less than 12 seconds. But before it was my turn, one guy took a second too long. Please, no! Without saying anything to him, Jean simply pulled the trigger and blew his head off.
No cleaning the corpse. The rest will work here, in the blood and with her boyfriend by her side. Next.
And after that, we all kept making burgers. The condiments were full of blood, but that didn't matter. That couldn't matter, because if we made them wrong, we would end up being another corpse. At that moment, we had to reveal ourselves. We should have all jumped against him, but can you blame us? We were just a bunch of scared teenagers. We just wanted to go home. Little by little, my companions began to fall and die. It was getting harder and harder to make hamburgers. The smell of blood was too much. Some of them started to vomit, but they couldn't even afford that, as Jean threatened to kill them if they took too long. When it was my turn again, I tried to go make the hamburger, but something was happening to me. My legs, they weren't working. I wanted to move and I wanted to make the burger, but I just couldn't walk. Furious, Jean came up to me and grabbed me by the hair, putting my head on the counter full of blood and rubbing it as if it were a rag.
Is that why you can't move, Alex? You better get used to the blood, because if you don't make that hamburger, yours will be here too. You understand?
Gathering all my energy, my body started working again, and I could answer him. Yes, sir. I started to make the hamburger as fast as possible, but it was very difficult. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was doing everything wrong, as if I was putting all the ingredients in automatic mode. I couldn't concentrate on my work. I just cried and begged to see my family one more time. Meanwhile, I felt the cold tube of Jean's gun on my head, squeezing me with disdain, as if he couldn't stand the urge to blow my head off in front of everyone. As soon as I finished the hamburger, Jean stopped the stopwatch and with a huge smile, showed it to me. The stopwatch read 12 seconds. I had made it.
Well, guys, it's 9 p.m. It was a pleasure working with you. I know I'm leaving the place with capable people.
After saying these words, Jean put the gun to his head and simply pulled the trigger. He fell dead instantly. After something so cruel and sadistic, you can imagine that this was news all over the world, right? Well, it wasn't. Burger King put up a huge amount of money so that this story would never become known. The victims' families were bribed and threatened. No one made a fuss. Burger King was too powerful, and everyone knew they were going to lose. My other coworkers and I quit immediately after that, and we even didn't give them time to look for replacements. Sometimes I walk by the restaurant and see that it's open again, with kids like us, having fun. When I sit down to eat, I never again get nervous about how long the food will take. I appreciate that they take their time, because every time food comes quickly, I am reminded of the stacked corpses of my coworkers and how close I came to being one of them. My name is Anthony Smith, and I was an employee at the Burger King restaurant in Houston, Texas. My reason for writing this is to share with the public the horrific activities that have occurred at Burger King for the past couple of years involving the disappearance of multiple Burger King employees with no information as to where they had gone, and my personal traumatic experience with the infamous Burger King. I interviewed for the job at Burger King on the 21st of November 2017. At the time, I was 21 years old and just looking for a way to get some money while I looked for a better job. The man who interviewed me was named Donald, and since the job didn't require any past experience or anything like that, it was more him giving me the restaurant's rules and guidelines than actually asking me questions. The rule he emphasized the most was kind of odd to me. He made sure I understood the manager and manager's office were strictly off limits, and any issues I had should be taken up with him, the assistant manager, as the manager was a very private man and did not like to be disturbed. Now, it seemed odd to me that the manager wouldn't want to interact with the employees at all, but it didn't seem like a problem at the time, and I was just glad I had gotten the job. The first few weeks working at Burger King were tiring. I was constantly doing dishes all day, and at night, when I was done with the dishes, I'd have to clean the whole place alone. I wasn't sure if I'd keep the job for much longer, but I did because I needed the money. Eventually, I got used to the routine, and I began bonding with the cooks and a girl named Becky, who always stayed late to lock up. While cooking at night, I couldn't help but always glance at the manager's door and wonder how no one had seen him or if he even cared what went on in the restaurant. One day, while doing the dishes, I decided to ask the cooks if any of them ever met the manager. Hey, this is kind of a weird question, but have any of you ever met the manager? A silence followed before Gerald, the head chef, looked at me and said, "Well, I haven't met him, but I've seen him." The silence remained as Gerald continued with, "It was back when I was still kind of new here. I was working the night shift when I heard his door shut. Obviously, I wanted to know what he looked like, so I stopped and had a look." Gerald paused as if trying to build up the tension. He laughed and continued, "I've told everyone already, he's a pretty normal guy. There's no mystery. There's no secret. Just a man that likes his privacy, so don't go looking for answers where there are no questions, Smith." He patted me on the back and walked away. We were open pretty late that night, but eventually everyone had gone home, and the only one I was left with was Becky. I decided to ask her about the manager as I couldn't believe Gerald's story. "Can I ask you something?" I asked as I cleaned down the last table.
"Whatever you want, Smith."
She replied, so I continued with, "What do you think about our manager?" I stopped cleaning and looked at her, trying to see if she had any reaction like the cooks, but she didn't seem even slightly bothered by my question. She just looked up at me and said,
"You mean the manager that doesn't exist? Honestly, I've never cared enough to ask questions. I just get paid and go home."
I responded with, "So you didn't find it even slightly strange? What if it's something illegal?" She laughed and kept looking at her phone.
"Yeah, sure, Smith. Maybe Burger King is a drug lab or
She was cut off by the sound of a shutting door coming from the back. Nobody else was with us, and the only offices at the back were Donald's and the manager's. "Did you hear that?" I said, wondering who was around this late. Becky didn't seem to care as she just replied,
Relax! It's probably just Donald. He stays late sometimes."
I was basically done cleaning, so I decided to check it out. I walked out to the back, and no one was there. So I decided it'd be better to just finish up and leave. "I didn't see Donald," I said as I returned to the dining area.
"It's cool. I saw who it was."
Becky said, still clearly unbothered. "Really? Who was it?" I asked. We were both pretty tired, and I figured I was keeping Becky by wasting time, so I told her I was done and left her to lock up. That night in bed, I thought for a while about what both Gerald and Becky said, and decided whoever the manager was, I shouldn't care as long as I did my job and got paid. As I walked to Burger King the next morning, I could see a small crowd forming around the restaurant and a couple of cop cars and police officers trying to disperse the crowd, a lot of which were Burger King employees. I figured someone had broken in and stolen something, but as I got closer, I realized the truth was far more worse than that. My heart fell to my stomach as I saw Becky sighted up against the door with her head tilted over. There was a large amount of blood on her head, and some had run down her arms and face. The police questioned all the employees on their whereabouts last night, and eventually it came up that I was the last person to see Becky alive, so I was taken into custody to be questioned. I told the police everything about how Becky and I usually stayed late together every night, and this wasn't a one-time thing. They asked me to think hard, as even the smallest detail could be the answer to this question. And it didn't take that much thinking to remember the only thing I found odd last night. "There was a noise," I said. "A noise?" The officer replied as that detail seemed to have interested him. "Yeah, a noise. It came from the back." The officer interrupted with, "The back like out back?" "No." I replied. Not outside. It's where the offices and stores are. At least, that's what I thought. But when I went to check it out, no one was there. I continued with, Becky said she saw someone, though. The officer's eyes lit up when I said that. Did she say who it was? No. All she said was he was really tall. That's it. The officer said, visibly disappointed. Nothing else. He continued, Listen, young man, we understand you're probably very emotional right now, and we get it. But a young lady was killed right in front of your workplace. Nothing was stolen, and she wasn't sexually assaulted. Do you understand what that means? It means either your friend Becky kept some bad company, or we have a very sick individual running around killing people. So if there's anything you're keeping from us, I suggest you say it. To be honest, I was trying to understand what had happened just as much as the police wanted to, and I don't know why, but I was certain the manager had something to do with Becky's death. I told the police I didn't know anything else, and after some more questions, they let me go. I was told not to travel out of the city and that I would be contacted again shortly. I didn't think I would be a suspect, but it made sense seeing I was the last person to see her alive. I thought about what to do for a while. I was already the leading suspect in this case and would be prosecuted if the police didn't find the actual killers or any evidence proving otherwise. I thought hard and back to that night, wondering if I had missed anything. All I could remember was the noise of the shutting door. It didn't make any sense how whoever it was left without me seeing them. I laid in bed thinking for hours before deciding I had to find out for myself what really happened that night. I walked over to Burger King at night with only one thing on my mind. Who was the tall man Becky saw? It wasn't hard getting past the police tape and getting in through the back door. The place was quiet. I couldn't help but notice how being in here alone filled the Burger King with an eerie feeling. I silenced my phone and lowered the brightness before walking straight over to where the offices were. And standing in front of the manager's office, sort of preparing myself for a reveal of some sort, I got the sense of tension as chills ran down my spine. I opened the door, and almost immediately something caught my eye. It was a door right at the back of his office. A door, I'm guessing, leads outside. It seemed to explain everything, but I couldn't help but still feel confused. I decided to look around the office and see if I'd find answers. It was quite a small office. It had a lot of paperwork and didn't have anything out of place. I figured the door was enough to prove the manager had something to do with Becky's death and would eventually help the cops figure out the rest of the story. But as I was about to leave, I heard something faint, but it got louder and I soon realized they were footsteps. I quickly turned my phone's flashlight off and hid under the desk right when the door slowly creaked open. The person walked into the room and there was silence for a minute. Fear was the only thing I could feel at that moment as I wondered if I would end up like Becky. There was no movement or sound, almost like whoever it was simply stood in the room with me. But then he said,
You can choose to remain hidden, but the outcome won't be any different, Smith.
His voice cut through the silence, but I remained quiet. He sounded old.
I'd figured you'd be more enthusiastic than this when you finally got to meet me. Don't you want answers to your questions?
I decided at this point, he obviously knew I was in the room, so there was no point hiding. I hit emergency call on my phone, slipped it in my pocket, and got out from under the table. I was met with an almost 7 feet tall man, completely bald with huge eyes that had completely sagged eye bags under them. He had a slight hunch forward and was skinny. You knew I'd come? I was wondering how he found out I was here.
Yes, you aren't a very smart individual,
he replied with no expression on his face. Why do you kill her? I asked, hoping the cops would get here before he killed me too.
No, I didn't kill her, Smith. You did,
he said, pointing at me. What? No, I didn't.
Yes, you did,
he screamed, interrupting me.
You killed her, Smith. Your questions killed her. You couldn't just work like everyone else, could you? Well, that's what killed her. You know, someone like you always comes around eventually, asking questions they're not meant to. Far too inquisitive for their own good, and then We have to kill them.
I was both scared and confused at this point. Was he killing people for just trying to find out who he was, and what did he mean by we? What kind of sick man kills people because they want to know what he looks like? I took a few steps back after asking the question, as I didn't know if I would be getting a reply. He would just get bored and kill me.
Look, Smith, a long time ago, probably before you could even say a word, I was part of a greater mission to keep the world how it is. To be rid of all the purges and mistakes on this earth. I was a member of the second clan of the KKK, a group with only one goal, to cleanse the world. But instead, we were seen as evil by this weak society and deemed belittling names such as white supremacists and hate groups. Unfortunately, I was arrested and put on death row. That was until some members of my clan broke me out, of course. We had to leave our home, but don't be mistaken. We took our mission with us. I am a very wanted man, and where better to hide than the place this society sees as a safe place, he continued. Do you understand, Smith? People like you are a risk to me and my clan as a whole. We tried to warn you not to ask questions, but you blatantly disregarded our warning.
The sickening look in his eyes couldn't be described, but I knew he was going to kill me. I didn't want to die, so I asked one last question as my final attempt to buy time. But why Becky? I asked, crying. He wore a sickened smile on his face as he said,
A part of me would like to say it's because she saw me, but that's not true. Despite her nonchalance toward the situation, she was an abomination. Her color of her skin and her supposed sexual orientation had doomed her already. My skin crawled just seeing her walk around every day. It was all just a matter of time.
He paused, then continued with,
Now, if you're done buying time, sadly, Smith, I can't have you around anymore.
I ran for the door at the back, but it was locked. My heart was pounding, and tears began filling my eyes. I turned and watched as he picked a hammer from the shelf before lunging at me. Fighting back was the only option I had, and I had to take it. I grabbed his hands midair and we began struggling. He was oddly powerful for an elderly man, and as he hit my nose with his head, I let go of him. I was disoriented for a few seconds, and that's when I felt the hammer hit my head. I immediately hit the floor as I was barely conscious and could feel the pool of blood forming around my head as I closed my eyes. In the distance, I could hear sirens, and the last thing I saw was the manager's feet move past me as he unlocked the back door and left. I woke up days later in the hospital and was informed I was almost dead by the time I arrived at the hospital. The manager was identified to be Griffith Theodore, a notorious and wanted leader of the second clan white supremacists. It was revealed both Donald and Gerald have supported and aided him for years and were never identified by the authorities. Griffith, Donald, and Gerald had escaped the police and were reported to have already fled the state. The following years after that were difficult. I suffered a traumatic brain injury from the blow to the head and had to undergo therapy and rehabilitation for traumatic brain injury. Burger King ruined my life, and there's a shiver that runs down my spine every time I walk past one. I can't help but always wonder if there's a deeper meaning to the restaurant's infamous slogan, "Have it your way."